Morning, Bob.
There we go. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm awake and vertical, and you know,
That's 99% of everything, they say.
absolutely.
You got to
Absolutely.
show up.
Absolutely. I gotta get something
Okay.
turned off here. There. I'm having fun with my Norman Rockwell.
You're having fun with your Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, the one I sent you, I think this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I sent you I sent you a photograph last week or
Right.
Monday with a child and a man.
Right.
And I sent you my block starting to block in the details a little bit this morning. So let's.
Yeah. Actually, we're going to talk about that. I've got some suggestions for you on that.
Well, I can use all the suggestions I can muster up.
And it's really good actually seeing this in kind of like an early phase, because a lot of people, it's habits, and if you can change those habits just a little bit, sometimes it really radically changes the end result of their work. Like for
All right.
Yeah, like for example, one of the things in working with people at Benson, the first couple of weeks was really getting them used to the idea of working at an easel, and I would place a table, a little TV tray between them and the easel. That way they couldn't be right up against it. They would have to stay back, and they could continuously see what they were doing with their work. But, many of them had, formed a lot of bad habits by doing what I call hugging your canvas,
Right.
right up against it, and you really can't effectively paint that way. I mean, there are times when that might be appropriate, because of your eyesight or something like that, and you want to put in some very clean, tight details, and you need to see what you're doing up close. But most people become very reliant on that. The other thing is, how they hold their brush.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I'm taking well, I've been working with a guy, Ernest Varner, for about 3 years now in his portrait class, and it's still beginners, but so there's new people that show up in this class, and a lady asked me, it was yesterday in class, she says, well, I keep getting paint all over my fingers. Well, I told her, you're holding the brush, you need to hold it at the end of the brush, not at the very tip. Oh, and when you do that, you get yourself further away from the canvas as well.
Yeah. And there, there's just a lot of little, kind of mechanical approaches that, little changes you can make to how you paint that really will make a huge difference. And it's just those little things, but people do the things that they do and they get into habits, and it's trying to kind of create a good set of foundations and habits, that you can repeat over and over and over again. And it's amazing, what just little stuff like that can do, to really improve your work considerably.
Well, I do consider myself a lifelong learner, and I'm not, I'm even at my tender age of 78, I'm still trying to absorb as much as I can.
Yeah. And, Bob, I've been doing this for over 50 years. And, there's not a day that goes by, that I can go into the studio that I'm not experimenting and playing with something that, I don't figure something new out. You know,
Yep.
you're always learning something new,
That's right.
and that's the wonderful thing really about, you know, creating art, is that there's so many different ways to approach it. And even when you think you really understand something, it's like every once in a while life gives you this wonderful little surprise that something will connect up here, you know,
Hmm.
and this little light bulb will go off, and you'll understand it on a whole totally different level than you did before. It's just like somebody pulled back the curtains and you could really see it, you know, in a new way. And
Well, that's interesting because I did a, I don't know, I showed you, it was been a while ago. It was a child that had a wet T-shirt on, a very blonde child, and that, from in my own opinion, was one of my better pieces of work.
mhm.
And I felt like I had made a breakthrough of some kind. I couldn't describe what it was exactly, but I figured, hey, I've moved up a half a rung on this ladder.
Mhm.
And then I was working on another painting, and whatever it was disappeared.
Yeah, that's it. Well, yeah, you know, we could have a long discussion about kind of the pros and cons of being a painter, you know, because it's like, you know, if you do this for a long time and you make this a regular habit and practice in your life on a daily basis, you know, I mean, you'll get kind of a rhythm, you know, and a kind of a flow, and you'll know. It's like when you step into that studio that morning to work, within the first, you know, say 10 to 15 minutes, you'll know whether you're going to have a good day or whether you're going to be fighting all day long to get, you know, what you want. And we all have good and bad days. And you know, I've not come up with an explanation as to why you're having a good day or a bad day. I wish I could have control over that, but I don't. But it happens to me. You know, it's like I step in the studio, and there are days where within the first 15 minutes, I know that whatever I'm going to do that day is going to be just awful, you know? And sometimes it's better to, like, you know, I'm really struggling with this, rather than fight it. Yeah, you know, maybe I need to kind of figure something else out to do. You know,
Yeah,
go for
right,
go for a walk. You know, go
right.
out and draw for a little while. You know, go do something else. You know, because, and particularly, you know, when you get to the point where you're working on paintings and you're trying to bring them to a finished level, and you know, and you're having a bad day, it's a good day to stay out of the studio.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
you
Yeah,
can, yeah,
Charles, I have an example of that hanging up behind me right there.
uh-huh,
You know, again, that mind's eye is so amazing. But when it came to reality, it was like, oh no, this is not what I thought. But after I looked at it, I said, boy, this is a happy mistake. I like the way that looks.
yeah,
And I'm going to do something else with it, you know. But I should have gone for a walk or taken a nap on Sunday. But no, I just had to play with acrylic paints.
that's right. Yeah, you gotta, yeah, I know. Yeah, you get, you know, and that's the thing about human beings. You know, you know, it's we put ourselves in these situations where it's like, all right, you know, I've given myself this little bit of time to perform a particular task, and I've got to do it really well, and we end up putting a lot of pressure on
On
ourselves,
ourselves.
and and it it seems, you know, it's almost like you sabotage yourself by doing that.
This
And
is true.
it's like sometimes, you know, it's like when you're feeling really good or whatever, it's like, yeah, you know, it's like, okay, everything's kind of clicking, things working for me. I think I'm going to head up to the studio today and just kind of play for a little bit. And it's amazing how it will just kind of flow, you know.
Yeah.
And other days, you know, it's like, ah, I got to go to the studio, I got to work, you know, and it's like, it doesn't matter what you do. It's just going to be a struggle. And at the end of the day, you know, I try not, you know, I used to try to kind of move through and struggle through those days, kind of thinking, okay, if I could just kind of get through this, I'll get something out of it. And you know what I find most of the time is that what I've learned is I end up working against myself.
Mhm.
And I end up undoing a lot of stuff that really was pretty nice, you know,
Yeah.
and just destroying it, you know, in my attempt to just like, just kind of control it and just, it's like I got to get this done, you know, and I don't really know what the right answer is for everyone, and I think everybody's got to kind of go through that and kind of figure out their way of working and kind of working through things like that. But yeah, that's the struggle. That's the struggle with creating art. You know? And it's no different from somebody who has been doing it for a couple of years versus somebody who's been doing it for 50 or 60 years. I think though, if you don't learn anything over that 50 or 60 years, the thing you have to kind of finally come down to is I really need to listen to me and what's going on with me. And if I'm struggling, then okay, maybe I need to figure something else out to do right now until, I'm in a better place, and I can come in and work with this. So that's a philosophical discussion for a later date that we will all have. Anyway, we got about 12 people here. Okay, we're gonna get rolling. First of all, happy Wednesday.
All right.
We made it. We're not quite to the top of the hill yet, but we're just getting there, and we're gonna start on the downhill of the week. Okay. So anyway, we got some great stuff to share today. You guys have sent in some really, really good work, and there's lots and lots of fun stuff that we're going to talk about your work. But before we do that, I'm going to share a video with you. Okay, and this you've seen this guy before. He's gotten better in this video. He's got a very heavy English accent, and sometimes it's hard to kind of make out what he's saying, but he's trying really, really hard to speak very clearly and enunciate his words, which is nice. And he's got some really interesting things to share. Okay, and he's talking about how, as an artist, you work with these tools called brushes, and how you create a painterly effect to your work. Okay, so I'm going to play this, and then we're gonna talk about it a little bit, and we're gonna look at some examples of even our own work where we could be more painterly, maybe. All right, I don't need that one. Okay, I need this one right here. Whoop. All right, can everybody see the big word simplify?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Off we go. And this is Alex Treveris.
Welcome back, everyone. Alex Treveris here. This video is going to be about the best brushes to use for oil painting. And while we're on the subject of brushes, I thought I'd also talk about brushwork and how to achieve a loose, painty appearance when you work. There are lots of different kinds of brushes, and in this video, I'm going to tell you what all these different brushes are, and I'll be showing you what they do. But before you go out and buy a load of expensive brushes, you need to know that it isn't actually the brushes themselves that hold the key to bold, painterly brushwork. The brushes you see here belong to the Spanish painter Joaquin Sorolla, one of the artists of the late 19th century we typically associate with bold bravura of brushwork.
Okay.
And as you can see, his brushes do not appear to be in particularly good condition.
Okay.
The artists sort of...
I'm going to stop this for a second, and I'm going to mute everybody since some of you can't do it yourselves. And that way we don't get a lot of background. Okay, good. All right. Let's try this again.
Past did not have access to the wide variety of good quality brushes we do today, and yet they were able to achieve outstanding results. So brushwork isn't necessarily about using the best brushes, but rather it's got more to do with how you use them. So in this video, as well as talking about brushes, I'm also going to be sharing with you the practices you need to develop and the bad habits you need to avoid to help you achieve looser, more painterly brushwork. But first of all, here are some of the different kinds of artist brushes that can be used for oil painting, which are made of a variety of different types of hair. We have bristles made of hog hair, which are the type of brushes most frequently used for oil painting because their stiffer hairs are more durable and hold more paint. Then there are brushes made of softer animal hair, like sable, mongoose, or badger. And we have synthetic brushes, which are generally softer and offer an economical alternative to soft animal hair brushes, which can be pretty expensive. The other way we categorize brushes is by their shape. The most common shapes are flat brushes and filberts, which are flat brushes with rounded ends, shaped into a point like an almond. We also have round brushes. I personally don't use many rounds other than these smaller round brushes called riggers that can be shaped into a point and used for details. And then there are specialty brushes like fan brushes, which can be used for blending and achieving other textured effects. Another important characteristic is the length of the hair. Shorter haired brushes, known as brights, are stiffer and are used when you want to load up a lot of paint. And here are all the brushes I've laid out for this demo. I have hogs, synthetics, badger and other soft animal hair brushes, flats, filberts and riggers in a range of different sizes. I'll put a list of the brushes I'm using in the description below. And to show you what all these brushes do, I'm going to be painting a self-portrait from life using a mirror. But before we get started, I want to show you this small thumbnail I did in preparation. Doing a thumbnail before you start is always a good idea because working on a small scale forces you to simplify your subject and it helps you identify some of the problems you'll encounter in advance. The reason I did this thumbnail was because I wanted to pre-mix some of my flesh colours. Because the first thing you need to do if you want fluid visible brushwork is to make sure you use enough paint. So here, I've used a palette knife to mix 4 piles of each of the main values, the shadows, the midtones, the main light, and the highlights. I'll put a full list of the colours I'm using in the description below. I'm going to start off by placing a coloured ground to remove the white of the canvas. This is a grey mixture made with ultramarine and transparent oxide red, diluted with solvent. The brush I'm using is a large badger head brush. You can use any large brush for this, but I prefer using softer head brushes because they don't leave as many visible brush marks as stiffer hog brushes. Here, I'm wiping back the ground with some paper towel. You want to make sure the ground is reasonably dry before you start painting on it, or else it will get mixed into the paint and everything will start slipping around. Next, I'm going to place my head on the canvas, starting with the top and bottom. The brush I'm using is a medium sized 4 hog filbert. When you start mapping out a painting, try to use a brush that isn't too small. That way you will avoid getting caught up in any intricate drawing too soon. Once the top and bottom of my head have been placed and the scale I'm going to be working at established, I'll then place the sides of the head and start mapping out the features. Here, I'm placing a vertical centre line that runs down through the bridge of the nose in the middle of the mouth. Then, about halfway down between the top and bottom, I'm placing a horizontal centre line for the bottom of the eyes. Here I'm placing a horizontal line for the eyebrows, and here's one for the nose. These centre lines are really important because they show the tilt of my head and they'll act as a guide for placing the features, but I don't think they're quite right, so I'm rubbing them out ready for another go. Here you can see I'm rechecking the tilt of my head. After placing the centre lines, I'm going to indicate the main areas of shadow, like the eye socket and the edge of the shadow on the forehead. But that is all the underdrawing I'll be doing before going in with colour. First of all, I'm massing in my beard with a transparent dark mixture made with transparent oxide red and ultramarine. The brush I'm using for this is a large size 8 Hog Filbert. Next, I'm using a large size 10 Hog Filbert to mass in the light side of my head. If I had a more accurate underdrawing, I'd be trying to hang on to it, so I'd be scared of putting down paint and my work would end up looking tight. But by keeping the drawing really simple, this allows me to put down the paint with big broad strokes. I'm now using another size 10 Filbert, a clean one, to mass in the shadows. You can see that I've simplified my head into a few big shapes: the light side of my head, the shadow side, the eye socket, and the beard. It's this ability to see my subject as large shapes or masses that's the real key to achieving a painterly appearance when you work. If you want to apply paint with big, bold brushstrokes, you need to work with big shapes. You need to be able to reduce your subject into a few simple masses that you can block in with a large brush before you work on the smaller shapes and details. This process of working from large to small is called mass drawing, and it was how artists like Sorolla achieved their painterly style. With the shadows and the lights massed in, I'm next going to add the third main value, the highlights, which fall on the parts of my head that face directly opposite the light source. The brush I'm using is a medium-sized size 4 Hog Filbert. I'm now adding the fourth main value, the midtones, which I'm placing along the edges of the shadows. This midtone represents a plane change in between the shadows and the lights, which rounds the form. So I'm starting to sculpt or model my head. Now, if you want your work to look painterly, it's the brush strokes that you put down during these modeling stages that you want to remain visible. To achieve this, the first thing you need to do if you want big, bold brush marks is to use big brushes. Here, I'm still using my size 10 Filbert, turned sideways to paint the front plane of my nose. I also want you to pay attention to the way I'm holding my brush. If you want your brush marks to appear loose, you need to hold your brush loosely. Gently hold your brush by the back of the handle. Do not tightly hold the front of your brush in the same controlled way you would a pen or a pencil. I like using filberts for modelling because their rounded ends mean that the marks they leave blend slightly when you paint them into other colours. This saves me from having to soften their edges or do any more refining later on. Here, I'm adding a much cooler version of my midtone to the edges around my eye socket. Another thing it's really important to try and avoid if you want to achieve a painterly appearance when you work is that you don't over-refine. You must try to be as economical as possible with your brushwork. If you keep going over the same areas again and again, you will lose the freshness of your initial marks. So try to touch the canvas with your brush as little as possible. Though this takes a lot of discipline. Whenever I watch these videos back, I still always catch myself fiddling around too much. The best way to avoid over-refining is to keep standing back and viewing your work from a distance. From further away, it will appear more refined because your marks will blend optically. Up close, your work will appear too rough, so you'll want to keep refining and fiddling around with it. Remember, paintings are mostly viewed from a distance, so ideally your work should come into focus where the viewer will be standing, and up close it should look more choppy and abstract. Here, I'm checking the angle at the back of my neck because next I'm going to start blocking in the background. The brush I'm using for this is a large flat hog. Actually, this isn't a hog, it's a synthetic brush by Rosemary & Co called an ivory, but it has quite stiff bristles which behave just like a hog. Do you see how this flat brush leaves a firm edge, which is why I'm using it for the outline of my head against the background. The firmer edges flat brushes give you mean you can use them if you want to achieve an even more blocky, structured appearance with more broken colour and visible planes, what's sometimes referred to as a tiling technique. Here, I'm using a medium size 4 filbert to place the reflected lights on the right side of my head. And next, I'm using my large flat brush to place the background on the right side of my head, which is a little lighter than the left. So my head is now blocked in. I have all the large masses and the major plane changes between them established, and my head is definitely starting to look solid. But can you tell it's me yet? Anyway, I think I'm just about ready to start adding some of the smaller shapes and working on features. I'm going to start by refining the area around the bridge of the nose, looking at the transitions in between some of the larger shapes. It's important if you want your work to look painterly that once you get into these refining stages, you try to avoid blending with your brush. Look for variations in colour in between the larger shapes. Mix the colours that you see and keep adding more paint. To add these smaller shapes, I'm starting to use some of my smaller brushes. But even so, I'm still trying to use the largest brush I can get away with. You want to use brushes that are slightly larger than you feel comfortable with. The other thing to watch out for as you add these smaller shapes is that you don't cover up all the larger brush strokes underneath. You want some of that structural brushwork to remain visible. So again, keep standing back and try not to add too many smaller shapes. Try to use them sparingly. I'm now ready to start work on the eyes. Here, I'm placing a dark accent for the iris. The brush I'm using for this is a really soft, long-haired synthetic brush called an Eclipse Coma by Rosemary & Co. The softer hairs enable me to place these dark accents on top of the lighter colours underneath without the colours mixing together. If I were to use a stiffer brush, it would disrupt the paint underneath and the colours would be much more likely to mix. So that is what all those fancy soft-haired brushes are used for. They're for when you need to apply paint on top of wet paint underneath and you don't want your colours to mix. With one eye finished, I'll then start work on the other eye. Here, I'm very carefully rechecking their alignment. However, after placing the right eye, it soon becomes apparent that there isn't enough room for it on the right side of my face. Therefore, I need to make the right side of my head wider. So here, I'm using my palette knife to scrape back the right side of my head in order to repaint it. When you notice a mistake with any of your smaller shapes or details, like the alignment of the eyes, it will often mean there's something wrong with the larger shapes underneath. And in order to correct the mistake, you may have to scrape back and readjust a whole section of your painting. When this happens, you must always be willing to do so, because a very big part of achieving a painterly style comes from having the confidence to put down paint. And the confidence to put down paint comes from knowing how to correct your mistakes. With the right side of my head established, I'm next going to start work on the mouth and beard. Now, I grew this beard especially for this demo, because covering the lower half of my face with hair means that there's less for me to paint, so I'll finish this demo in less time. But also because the hair of my beard provides some interesting textures, and I don't have any hair on top of my head. Here, I'm using an old worn-out badger brush to create the soft edge between the hair of my moustache and my bottom lip. I find the loose strands of old worn-out brushes can be pretty useful for creating the appearance of hair. Now, I'm quite extravagant with brushes, and I use a lot of different kinds when I paint, but you definitely do not need loads of brushes to paint with. There are many very accomplished painters who produce fantastic work with only a few brushes. In fact, if you're a beginner, I recommend starting with just a few good quality brushes, then really finding out how to get the most out of them and everything they can do before you start experimenting with lots of different kinds. You want to get really familiar with your brushes so that they become an extension of your arm. And if I had to pick just one kind of brush to paint with, the most versatile brush to use with oils is the Hog Filbert. 3 or 4 different sized, good quality Hog Filberts will definitely do everything you need. You can use the flat side of the brush to mass in paint. You can turn it on its side for finer work, and the rounded ends mean you can paint things into each other to achieve soft edges. Another thing it's really important to remember is to keep cleaning your brushes as you work. If you don't use clean brushes, your colours will all get mixed together and you'll end up with a complete mess pretty quickly. This is the reason I use a lot of brushes when I work, but you can easily get by with just a few brushes as long as you keep cleaning them with solvent. A really good way of keeping your brushes clean while you paint is to get a brush cleaner like this one. The small grill inside is really good for scraping the paint off your brushes, and the fact that they're sealable means you can save on solvent, so they're more economical. Right, here I'm using my palette knife to create the soft edge of my beard against the background. And the effect it produces works really well. But it wasn't intentional. This was one of those happy accidents you hear artists talking about, so I'm going to leave it. Which brings me to the final thing I want to say about brushwork, which is that while I'm painting, I don't actually think about the appearance of my brushstrokes. I find I've got too much else to think about trying to get the drawing values and colour right. So I just let the brushstrokes take care of themselves. Whenever I start worrying about the appearance of my brushstrokes, I find my work loses its freshness and starts to look laboured. So don't overthink the brushwork. Just make sure you mix enough paint, use large brushes, try to be as economical as possible with your brushstrokes, and just like your handwriting is unique, you will naturally develop your own painterly style. It's also key that you learn to recognise and work with the large underlying shapes that make up your subject. If you want to learn more about this way of working, my mass drawing course is available to watch on my Patreon channel. And with that, I think I'm just about done. So there we have it, a self-portrait from life using a mirror, which is a great exercise you can do at home. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time when I'll be showing you the proper way to take care of your brushes. Thank you for watching.
Okay. Anybody got anything to say about that?
I loved it. I loved it. I hate blending, so this taught me a lot.
Okay.
You know.
You're one of the few that uses two brushes also. I've noticed when you paint, you usually paint with just one brush.
Are you talking about me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes.
You're guilty.
Well, no, I'll claim that one. That's okay. And here's.
But if you can do it, I mean, do it.
He knows how to clean brushes.
Pardon?
You know how to clean the brushes.
Yeah. Well, you can wipe out a brush, and move on to the next color. Here's the thing, and the reason that I showed you this particular demo, that he and I have very similar approaches to painting, all right? And in some ways, we're very, very close to being kind of in the same place, in our development of our work. He concentrates a lot on technique. And I think, he's much younger than I am, but, he's at that phase where he's beginning to really kind of think through his process and finding ways of explaining to people, what he's doing and why he's doing it the way he's doing it, okay? And another thing I like about this particular video, he said very clearly, it's a very individual thing. What you do with a brush is not going to get, you're not going to get the same effect he does or I do. What you're going to find is that as you work with these tools, and again, you don't have to go out and get a lot of them, just start with a few, and really get to know them, well, and use them over and over again until you kind of begin to really understand how they work. And you're going to find that you can achieve things with that brush that I can't do, he can't do. It's going to be so unique and so different from anybody else's work that when, somebody who really understands painting looks at that, they're going to go, oh, okay, that's a Richard Johnston, or it's, June's or Wanda's, or, because each of us you know, each and every one of us have this individual quality to our work that nobody else can emulate, right? It's not going to be the same. And so, you know, that's kind of where you want to get, is to the point where your work looks like your work. And you need to recognize along the way that it's sort of a combination of the way that you think about things, but it's also the mechanics of your body, your hand, the way you handle the brush. And it's going to give your work a very different look than anybody else's out there. And so that negates that thing that a lot of art students struggle with, which is this thing, I'm looking for my style, right? Because you already have a style. All you have to do is you just have to paint, and you're going to find out what your style is, you know, and then you have to kind of like live with it. You know, it's like, okay, well, that's me, you know, that's what my work looks like. And that's okay. You know, it may not be, you know, it may not be like someone's work that you admire, but it will be, you know, it will be a good representation of who you are. So that all being said, you know, because we can go down that rabbit hole and we can talk about stuff like that for hours. You know, again, you know, try to keep it simple. You know, work with a few tools, you know, work with them for a while, you know, really get to know them and see what you can do with them, you know, develop them as far as you can. And when you get comfortable with those and you really feel like you've got a point where you can master, you know, things like, you know, a big flat brush, you know, then go out and throw something different in a mix, you know, get a smaller detail brush. But again, you know, by that time, you should feel comfortable with that big brush so that you don't have to rely on that small brush, you know, and that you can do like 90 to 95% of your painting with that big brush. You get in what you want very quickly and not get caught into that trap where you're putting lots of little paint strokes down and it's taking you weeks, months, years to cover a canvas, you know, that you could cover in.
That's what happens to me. It takes me forever just to do a little piece.
Right.
And I love this stuff. I'm going to try that.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Wanda. You know, the thing is,
Bernice.
I'm Bernice, I'm sorry, is always pick up the biggest brush that you can and try to do the most you can with it. And when you get down to, you know, where you just can't get the little shapes that you're looking for, then pick up a smaller brush, you know. Now, when I say smaller, if you started off with a brush that's, say, a number 16 or a 14 or a 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a 12, depending on the manufacturer things, is about 1.5 to 2 inch brush, okay? So then go from there to maybe a number 8, right? Which is maybe a 3/4 of an inch brush, right? And work with that for a while. And then really it's that last 5 or 10% that you're going to work with maybe a number 2 or 4 size brush, which is maybe like, you know, a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch wide, you know, brush, you know, so that you can get in and get those smaller shapes. So you see, you're starting with your big shapes and working down to your small shapes, right? Okay. But, you know, the mistake that most people, as, you know, trying to learn how to paint make is they start off with these little tiny 3-hair brushes and they want to paint the whole painting with, you know, this 3-hair brush. So, you know, 4 years later, you have the canvas covered for the first time. right? When you could have done it in 3 days if you just would have used that number 12 or 16, right? Brush and went in and really, put in some big shapes and blocked it in and work your way down. Okay. Anybody got anything to say about that? No?
Right.
No comment?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Charles.
Yeah.
I basically just started painting in January when I took that class at the center.
Right.
And I have a friend that I would send everything I did. And he's told me that since I've been watching you, I've lost my style. Trying to perfect some of the things that we talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I started basically using one brush. And
was that a big brush, little brush?
yeah, I'm sort of a medium to medium large, right?
Okay. All
But
right.
then as we progress here, I've gone to smaller brushes, which has sort of changed the way things look and what I do.
Okay. So my question is, why did you go to a smaller brush?
Thinking I needed it to get the little details that I wasn't getting with the big one.
Okay. And you're generally working with watercolor, right?
Correct. Oh, yeah, right.
Okay. And so I guess the thing I would say to you is resist that urge to go to those small brushes.
Okay.
Okay. Stay with the big brush. Okay. And be very, very selective about where you want to put that detail. See, what I'm trying to convey to everyone here is if you look at the painters that I've shown you over, the whole, course of time that we've been together, it's that most of the painters that I show you are very good at focusing in on a part of the painting that they really want you to look at, right?
Right.
They're not people who finish all the details, from one corner of the canvas to the other, right? And so to achieve that, you want to work broader, more general, looser, right? And so, do as much of your painting with that big brush as you can. And then when you can't get in there and get, what you want in that kind of area that you're focusing on, then begin to work down, to a smaller brush, all right? But always use the biggest brush you can,
Okay.
or, if you're working in oil paint, a palette knife, even a square of cardboard. There are painters out there and, using acrylic paint or oil paint who don't use brushes. They take chips of cardboard that they'll cut and they'll pick up paint and they'll lay a shape down with that, cardboard square, on there. And they'll paint with that. You don't have to paint with a brush. You can apply paint lots of different ways, but you can put that paint down. You can take something like a tool, like even the end of a brush or something like that, scrape back through it, and again, this is more oil paint and acrylic. There's so many different ways of applying paint, taking paint off, creating different types of surfaces, things like that, that again, the possibilities are really kind of endless. Now with watercolor, in your case, you're using a transparent medium. So whatever you put down initially, right, as either whether you're using a drawing, right, or you're just using like, big masses of value, whether that be monochromatic or whether that be, like in an ink wash, right, and or, you know, blocks of color, you know, those are going to stay there, and you're not going to get rid of them. So you're going to build on top of them, right?
Correct.
So in your case, I would say, you know, and really everybody, you know, go to the big brush. You know, I'm always a big advocate of use the biggest tool you can, you know, to get there as quickly as you can, and don't overwork it. Right? You know, don't go back in and
That's the other problem, overworking.
right. But
You don't know when to stop.
right, but you see, that's always the struggle. You know, that's always the struggle with creating a piece of art. You know, because again, you know, and he kind of addressed that in this video. It's like if you get caught up in an area, you know, it's kind of a natural tendency, I think, of any kind of visual person to want to go in and like put in as much detail as you can, thinking, you know, the thought is, you know, if I can put in that little highlight, you know, on the bottom of the eyelid and everything else, it's going to look more like an eye. And the fact is, when you step back and you look at it, you know, what you've done is you've overworked it. You know, you've put in too much. And that's why, you know, as an oil painter, as an acrylic painter, something like that, working in an easel, you need to do, you know, what you think you need to do as far as, you know, just being efficient and getting those shapes and planes in. And then you need to step back and you need to really look at it for a little while and think, you know, very carefully about how much further you want to go with that, you know, and at some point you're going to want to stop, you know, and not overwork it, because if you do, you're going to lose sort of that abstract quality, you know, to the painting. And I think you mentioned this as well. You know, when you're actually up close to the canvas, it shouldn't look like the thing that you're painting. You know, it should be these, you should see the paint, you should see the paint strokes, you should see how it was constructed. If it starts actually looking like an eye when you're standing right up against the canvas, then you've overworked it.
I had it cleaned last week, so I don't need it again.
Richard, you gotta mute yourself, guy.
Call me again later, please.
Okay.
How do you clean the brushes?
How do you clean them? You have a container of solvent. You have, now you're using oil paint, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if you're using oil paint, you're going to want to use terpenoid or some kind of odorless mineral spirits. You're going to want to take that brush, you're going to want to dip it in the solvent and take a rag, not a paper towel, okay? And that's really important. You want some kind of cloth, like an old towel, something like that, that's really absorbent. And you want to take and you want to wipe the brush out, you know, and you want to keep dipping it until you get all the paint out of it that you can, right? Now, if you want to check whether you've got the paint brush clean, you know, dip it in the solvent. Let me get a brush somewhere. Okay, so I've got a brush. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I take this brush and I've cleaned it out with a rag and everything else, and I've gotten all the paint that I think I can out of it, then the last thing I want to do is I want to dip it in the solvent again. And this is true with acrylic as well. You can do this with water. Then I'm going to take my fingers, okay? And if you don't want paint on your hands, things like that, wear a glove. And I'm going to grab just the end of the brush, okay? And then with my other hand, I'm going to take it and I'm going to begin to move it in a circle, okay? And what that's going to do is that's going to take the solvent that's up here and it's going to force it back down into this metal piece right here called the ferrule of the brush. right? And it's going to get it, and you're going to begin to see paint come out of it. And as paint comes out of it, dip it back in the solvent again, wipe it out, and do it again. When you don't get any more paint coming out of that ferrule, your brush is clean.
What
And then,
solvent are you using?
huh?
What solvent?
Well, it depends. You know, if you're acrylic, then it's just water. If you're using oil paint, then you're going to use like a terpenoid or some kind of odorless,
Terpenoid.
yeah, paint thinner. Okay.
Paint thinner, terpenoid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Now, you can get paint thinner at Home Depot and stuff like that. But the thing is, even though it says odorless, it still has like a really strong smell. Now, if you go to like a art store like Michael's, Joann's, whatever, you can get a product called Terpenoid, and it really is pretty odorless. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have fumes. It just means that you can't smell the fumes, all right? So it makes it a little more pleasant to work with. But that, you know, even though it's quote unquote odorless, you still have to have a fairly well ventilated room, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't make it safe to sit inside of like your bedroom with all the windows and doors and everything else closed up, you know, because again, those fumes will fill that room. And there's just as many fumes from an odorless turpentine as there is from something that really, you know, has a strong turpentine smell, okay? So that's a safety thing. So be careful about that. You know, open a window or have good ventilation in your room, right?
How long do you leave it in terpenoid?
Say what now?
How long do you leave it in the terpenoid?
You don't.
Or you don't just stick it in there? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you want to, you know, I mean, if you're using, here's the thing, if you're using oil paint, all right, most oil paint will take about 18 to 24 hours to begin to set up and really dry, okay? So you don't really need to leave your brushes, you know, in the terpenoid. You can just set them down. You know, you lay a rag out there, you know, put them down. When you're ready to clean them, you know, then dip them in terpenoid, you know, wash them out. You know, they don't need to stay in the jar. Okay. Now, some people, you know, and I'm guilty of this too, okay? You know, some people get a little lazy, you know, and they just throw them in the jar. And they let them sit there for a day or two, and then they'll come back and they'll clean them. You know, I don't, you know, I don't really promote that idea, even though I'm guilty of it myself. You know, ideally what you want to do is, you know, don't leave them in, you know, sitting in solvent. You know, when you're done at the end of the day, take a little bit of time, leave yourself a little bit of time to clean your brushes out, wipe them out really well, and then just, you know, lay them out and let them dry. So that way, if you come back painting the next day, a couple of days later, those brushes are ready to go and they're ready to use, and you don't have to go, you know, try to clean paint that's begun to dry in them or anything else.
Isn't it bad for the bristles to leave them?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's bad. It's bad for the bristles to leave them in solvent. It's also bad for the bristles to just let the paint dry in there. You know, because if you look at the shape of the brush, let's say that you get a filbert, right? Or a flat, and all of a sudden your flat brush begins to look kind of like a fan brush because it's beginning to spread out that way. What that's telling you is that you haven't cleaned that brush very well, and that paint is beginning to build up inside here and push those hairs, you know, apart, okay? And so that's telling you you're not cleaning your brush as well. Your brush, for as long as you use it, now you may wear off the end of it, you know, where you're scrubbing it and working with the brush. But if your brush is changing the shape and it's beginning to spread out and stick out in all kinds of these different directions, that's just because you're not getting all the paint out of here, down here in this ferrule, okay? That's why it's changing the shape of the brush, right? So if your round brush isn't round anymore, it looks like, you know, somebody who stuck their finger in a light socket and their hair's, you know, going all different directions. Again, you just haven't cleaned the brush, okay? So taking care of those tools, you know, that's a basic thing. And, you know, if you do, quote unquote, you know, wreck a brush, you know, some of those brushes, you know, that get all splayed out and everything else, some of those can be really useful. You know, if you're a landscape painter and you want to paint trees and things like that, you know, a big fuzzy brush, you know, you can load it up with paint and roll it around, and you can get all kind of leaf effects and everything else with something like that. So, you know, so until you've finally worn the brush off to where there's no hair, like right down there, it's still a useful tool. You can use it in a lot of different ways, right? So don't go throwing your brushes away just because you've kind of loved them to the point to where, you know, there's not much left, all right? Anybody else got any questions? We kind of meandered, gone all over the place here. Anybody else?
I've got to leave.
You got to leave?
I'll leave.
Oh, okay. Well, we're sorry to see you go.
Oh, I do have a question.
Okay.
What's the difference between Mod Podge and Gesso?
Ah, Mod Podge and Gesso. All right. Well, it's a big difference. Gesso, and we talked about this the other day. Gesso can either
Primes the surface.
okay, it's fine.
Gesso primes the surface. I remember that part.
Right. Yes, you use gesso to prime the surface, and the reason that, you know, they don't call it just straight acrylic paint or just straight oil paint is the fact that it's that oil paint or acrylic, and what it has is it's got a calcium powder added to it, and what that calcium does is it makes a neutral barrier between the surface that you're working on and the paint that you're putting on it, right? And the calcium makes that layer of paint more absorbent so that when you put oil paint on it or acrylic or whatever, you know, it has something to kind of grab onto, right? And it's not going to come off. Now, if you tried to paint directly on canvas, right? Let's say that you went out and got some raw canvas that had not been primed, and you put it on a panel, and you started adding oil paint to it directly. The issue with that is the fact that eventually, you know, that oil paint has got different chemicals and acids and things in it, and it's going to slowly eat away the thing that you painted on, whether that be wood, canvas, paper, cloth, whatever. Now you put the gesso on there because, again, it gives you this neutral barrier that the oil paint can sit on, and those acids and things won't affect it, see? And so it protects the canvas that you're painting on, or the wood panel or whatever, and it makes it so it will last a good long time. It's what we call archival, right? So that's gesso. Okay. Now Mod Podge. Okay. Mod Podge is a brand name. Okay. But what Mod Podge actually is a really early form of just clear acrylic. All right. That's all it is.
Oh,
Okay. You know, Mod Podge was made, I think they started making Mod Podge back in the 1950s, right? And the 1950s was when acrylic paint, which had been developed by the US government and the military, right? They were experimenting with it because what they were looking for, they were looking for a paint that they could paint their armored, like tanks, personnel carriers, things like that, very quickly in the field. It would dry and it would protect the metal coating on the tank or whatever. Okay, it didn't work out very well, and so it was useless for them, kind of, and they developed other things, but the acrylic, was still pretty useful, and so people started making acrylic paint that you could then paint your house with. Okay. And it was water-based, so it would clean up pretty well, things like that. And then eventually, where it was kind of really about the late 1960s, early 1970s, some of the paint companies like Grumbacher, Liquitex, things like that, started developing an artist set of colors and paints for artists to work with in acrylic. And so Mod Podge is nothing more than it's that base acrylic without any color in it. And it's, really wonderful stuff, because what you can do with it is you can use it as a finished coating to seal things so that they're permanently attached to whatever surface you want to put them on. And it's transparent so you can see through it, and it protects like pieces of paper, cloth, leaves, whatever you stick down with it, it's going to stay there. Now, again, Mod Podge is a brand name. Everyone who makes an acrylic paint makes what they call a gel medium, right?
Gel, okay.
Yeah, and it's called either, you can get it thin, right, which is just a regular gel medium. You can also get it in what they call a heavy gel medium. Every manufacturer who makes acrylic also, they make 100 different versions of that gel medium with things like sand in it, glass beads, you name it. If they can throw it in there, they will. And they'll sell it to you in a jar. But the fact is, you can go and you can get a big jar of heavy gel medium, and you can put your own sand in it. You can put your own glass beads in it. You can put whatever you want into it and use it, on a piece of wood, canvas, piece of furniture, anything you want to put it on your wall, and create any kind of texture or surface you want. Okay. And it's the same thing as Mod Podge. Okay. It's just clear acrylic. That's all it is. All right.
Well, that helped me a lot. I understand a lot better.
Okay.
I knew they were both kind of clear medium. I didn't know the difference in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really isn't any other than, there's a company out there, who has that brand name of Mod Podge.
Okay.
And they market it and they sell it in craft stores, right? Like Joann's, Michael's, things like that. But in that same store, if you go over a couple of aisles to where the acrylic paint is, they have heavy gel medium. It's the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, the heavy gel medium may be $1 or $2 cheaper than the Mod Podge. Okay.
Okay.
And if I were in Joann's or Michael's, I'd go look at both. And it's like, if Mod Podge were $1 cheaper for a quart, I would buy the Mod Podge. If it was $1 cheaper or so, for the heavy gel medium, I'd buy that. Okay. They're interchangeable. They both clean up with water. They're both clear acrylic. Same thing. Okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. So anyway.
So when you apply, can I have a question, please? When you apply the gesso or the Mod Podge or the heavy media, acrylic media, do you mix it with the water or no? Or just a little?
No. I would, unless it's gotten like really, really thick, I wouldn't put any water in it. I would use it pretty much so straight the way it is. Okay. When you start adding water to it, what you're doing is you're breaking down the bonding quality of the medium. Okay.
I see. Okay.
Now, if you need it thinner, okay, again, you can get gel medium in different weights. You can get it in heavy, and you can get the regular gel medium. And if your heavy gel medium gets too thick, you can take it, put it in some kind of container, add a little of the regular gel medium to it, keep stirring it, right? Until you get it to the consistency you want, and then use it, okay? But I wouldn't add water to it.
But there's also a liquid medium too, if you want it really
Yeah.
thin.
Mhm.
Right, so they're different weights, the liquid, the medium, the heavy, so it depends on how you want to use it.
Yeah, and they've also got, they've got so many different things. They've got stuff that they call a flow medium, which is a really thin gel medium, right? That helps your paint kind of flow and spread. They're going to find all the different ways they can of selling you, different stuff that you could just buy the one jar of the heavy gel medium and do with it. I'd buy that, and I'd buy the regular medium, and between the two, I'd mix whatever weight of it I needed, and then add paint to it, color, whatever. Use it as a glue to stick stuff down. I mean, you can do all kinds of stuff with this, and it's plastic. It's never going to go anywhere. It's always going to be there. Okay.
That's what a lot of these artists use when they do the glue. Instead of gluing down the pieces of paper, they use the gel because it
Yes.
won't come up. The glue
Right.
might.
Yeah. I mean, the
Also
gel.
want this color.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing, collage artists and things like that, they were using Mod Podge because it's a much better product long-term than white glue, right?
Glue.
Okay. So anyway, well, look, we're going to cut this off. We're going to be back at 2:00. Okay. We're going to look at you guys' work. All right. So it's been fun, and we will see you at 2:00. Okay.
All righty.
Good.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.